All right, welcome everyone to this episode of Monetizing Your Mental Capital, brought to you by Seller Labs. I'm your host, Will Christensen. I have Rob Prime here. Rob, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Rob, right at the very beginning of all of our episodes, I like to just ask that question. Why should our listeners be listening to you around monetizing your mental capital?
I guess because I've done a lot of things in the last 25 years. So I started off in SEO and then I moved on to building businesses of my own. And I'm pretty lazy as well, which is probably a good reason to listen to me because I find shortcuts and things and I do what I quite like to do, I guess. And now I'm running a service business, an agency which I've grown in the last 2 years, which is it's doing pretty well. And it's a complete change for me. So I think the short answer is, although I've sold a few businesses, my mistakes are probably the best things that I have to offer because I've got plenty of those as well.
Beautiful. I think that's well said from a standpoint of my mistakes are what I bring to the table to help you understand a little bit what you shouldn't do so that you could avoid some of those pitfalls. I too have so many mistakes. I resonate with what you're describing. And I think that's how we learn. That's how we grow. And I love learning from other people's mistakes as well. So pretty powerful concept there. All right. So Rob, next question. When is the first time you can remember monetizing your mental capital? And so with this question, I'm looking for you to go way back. And sometimes people are like, well, does it count if it was like selling lemonade? Yeah, it counts if you were selling lemonade. Does it count if I had a cooler in the corner and I was selling, Coke to my not cocaine, but like actual bottles of soda to my siblings, and I had a guy who said, I was selling drugs in high school like that. I've had it all. So I'm curious, when's the first time you can remember, monetizing your mental capital?
So I guess if it wasn't when I was 8 years old at school, I'm going to skip past that one where I was selling. My mum had an antique shop, and I had my little stall outside selling things for 50p each. But skipping past that, I didn't do much till I was 27. I was, as I mentioned, I was pretty lazy.
Wait a minute. So eight years old, and your parents had an antique store?
Yeah, it used to be when antique shops were like pretty popular back then, before like eBay and all the other sort of online marketplaces. I had an antique shop, and I used to have a little stall outside, and everything was 50p. So I guess it was before Poundland. So I guess they stole my idea. But yeah, it was all my little trinkets that my mum gave me to sell out there for 50p. And I remember the excitement of that. So that would be my first monetizing mental capital would be that.
So you were sitting out front.
Yeah.
You had the store inside and there was all kinds of stuff in there. And you essentially had like the States, that would be the dollar store, right? So you had like
exactly
the dollar section of stuff, and you had, was it other antiques, like other trinkets that way?
Yeah, it was just little trinkety thing. I don't even honestly know if I ever sold anything. Actually, no, I know. I think about it. I can't remember really actually, but I remember having the store. I remember it being everything was 50p. So that was the hook. Whether I sold anything, I'm sure I got a couple of sympathy sales, but that would be my first time in e-commerce. Well, not e-commerce, but like physical commerce.
8 years old. Hey,
physical commerce.
That's starting early. 8 years old. And what year was that?
Oh, well, I'm 48, so that would have been 83.
83. So, long before we had an opportunity for online e-commerce in any way, shape, or form.
Absolutely, exactly. And so that, so that's sort of at a stretch getting there. But I guess after that, it would be, honestly, when I was 25, and and I was basically, I wanted to be a professional golfer, and I was at home, and I first went on the internet, and I saw that there were these, and I needed free golf balls, so I contacted some driving ranges, but the internet was so basic, and then I ended up getting samples to play golf with and stuff like that. That would be the second time, but the main time after that was 27. I was working in a golf shop, and I started a loan business, which, believe it or not, sprung out of nothing, to be honest with you. And then
hold on a second. I want to talk about the loan business, but you went and got free golf balls? What
Yeah, I'm a bit embarrassed about this one because basically it was a bit sort of, more than cheeky, really. It was like the internet was so young. And basically I said that I was like a professional golfer that needed sponsorship, and I wasn't. And they and then I got sent all these golf balls from everywhere. But the internet was so young that I could have been anywhere. So my first story is a fraud, basically. So it's not a good look. But yeah, that was... Yeah.
You were trying to figure out the way I need golf balls because I'm going to be a professional golfer. And, and So I too have had moments where, I have represented myself in a way that I would let them assume that I was more than I was. So I get that 100%. And you obviously got some golf balls out of that and began to understand like, hey, wait a minute, people will help me get stuff done if I just ask. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, exactly that. And I was getting like boxes turning up of crates of golf balls. I mean, literally. And the internet probably consisted of about 50 websites. I mean, it was crazy small. But it was like it was World Trading or something like that. And it had all these like people from, and so I got them sent over from China and stuff and everything. It was like mad. But as I say, the loan one was the real one. And that was when I was buying domain names, when domain names were like first came out. And I bought a loan domain name, and which was debt consolidation loan. And I was working in the golf shop for like minimum wage, and I bought this domain name. And long story short, I put a website on it, and I got like one visitor to this website. And I was like, wow, I've had a visitor to a website. And I thought, and then I've got two visitors to it. So I thought, well, and I kept checking it. And I remember being so excited by getting like a couple of people to this, the worst website you've ever seen, by the way. Anyway, long story short, I thought, well, what if I got 100 websites and then 100 domain names, and then I'm going to have 200 visitors a day. So I did that, and it sort of built from there really, and that was how it started. And in the end, I sort of built like, I think it was like the second largest loan brokerage in the UK off the back of that. And I was all the time working in the golf club, in the day, and going at night I was doing that basically. And so it was just literally scaling things like that. Yeah.
That's so fascinating. So what year was it that you bought that first domain name?
It would be about 1998. I would say 1998, no, exactly. And it was back where Lycos was a search engine, Alta Vista. These were like the big search engines. But back then it was so easy to rank. And, like it was really, it was basically, you had something called the DMOS directory. And if you got in that, your ranking would just go nuts. And if you bought links on, expensive sites, your ranking goes nuts. So we knew exactly how to get perfect rankings, every single time. So we were like ranked number one in the world for loans, like, above Bank of America at one point, believe it or not, and the UK. And it was a crazy time actually, when things were super easy in SEO.
And what's interesting, I think if we were to go and make a phone call back to that individual who was running that business, he wouldn't have said that it was that easy, because in many ways, like he was still trying to, it was so new. It was so like, got to figure this out. But you look back now and you're like, oh my gosh, if it was that easy to rank in that situation, I'd be a billionaire, right? Like there's
absolutely. Well, I always say to my friends, I say, if I just actually, ironically, if I just kept the domain names and things that I bought then and just probably didn't do anything for the next, now I'd probably be like much better off than I am, to be frank, because, so it's just having the crystal ball, isn't it? It's, it's just having the crystal ball. But yeah, that was something that sort of, really, I learned a lot of lessons on the way with that business, because at the start I was just getting clicks from, like affiliate clicks. And then I put a form on there and I was getting someone offered me like 50p a lead. And then I realized after a while they were selling them to someone that was getting them for £7 a lead. So I went to the £7 place, and the £7 place was selling them to someone else who was getting £25. So I went to the £25 place, but the £25 place was selling to a lender who was paying £100 a lead. So I ended up going direct to the lender, and it was getting £100 a lead. For something I was selling for 50p at the first time, and it was £100 each. I know, and there was, I know, and because I was so like naive, I didn't have a clue. I didn't know what I was sitting on.
Okay, so hold on. I want to kind of pick this apart a little bit and open up. So one of the things we do on these episodes is we try to help the listeners identify opportunities that they're sitting on that they don't even realize they're sitting on. And I want to identify the behavior or the desire that created this opportunity for you. And so what I'm curious of is, what made you decide to go buy a domain name and throw up a website to begin with?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the domain names, I don't really remember how I got into domain names, actually. I was just sort of searching around this small internet, which was just sort of starting really. And I obviously saw domain names there. I didn't really know that they'd be valuable. But again, honestly, not sounding very good about myself. I thought, well, there'll be lots of places that probably aren't going to register their name yet because they're going to be new to it. So I can probably go in and buy a load of names and see if they want them really. Like, so there was like one like Red Arrow.
Arbitrage. Stuff like that. Yeah. Go in and
it was.
And I did that in some situations, and I did it So this was when I was in college. I would go buy a domain name, and the domain name was like, Brook Creek Brewery or something like that was down the street. And I knew like they hadn't bought the domain name yet. And this was like 2010, something like that. And
Sure.
the internet was much more prevalent. Like if you didn't have a Google Maps listing, you were probably getting left behind. Like there was a lot of that going on. And I would go in and buy it and say, look, I've got the domain name. Why don't you hire me as a web designer, and I'll help you build your website. And if you want the domain name, you can buy it from me. And I wouldn't mark it up too much, right? Because I only bought it for $10. But because there are those people out there that'll gouge you or whatever. But I was trying to almost do it as a public service, I picked this domain name up, and I'm one of the scrupulous individuals that I'm only going to charge. Like I spent some time looking at your website and connecting those dots. I'm only going to charge you $100 or something like that for my time that I spent going there and coming here and telling you about it. Or you can hire me as a web designer, and it's not going to cost you anything. So I hear you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Fascinating. So I think for me, when you looked at that scenario, you looked at an ecosystem that was changing or growing. So you said,
exactly.
What in my world is changing or growing? And you got naturally curious about it, and you just started researching and asking questions. And at the time, one of the things that's fascinating now is you have the internet and you have AI that you can start asking questions to and getting a lot of information. But I think where the real opportunity lies is in those places where AI and the internet are probably so new that there really isn't a lot of new information out there. And at the time when you were there, like there wasn't a place that you could like go Google. There wasn't Google. Google didn't exist.
No.
How did you find new information about the internet?
Well, it was like things like so it started search engines, but they were terrible. They were like Lycos, Ask Jeeves, different things like that. But they were pretty awful, to be honest with you. Because they were so easily manipulated, frankly, by things like stuffing keywords in and things like that. So they weren't very good, but they were the sources of information, really, I guess. And I decided that that's probably been the thing that I'm good at, I reckon, is probably looking at something that's new and jumping on early and not having to be the best at something, but having to maybe be the first or one of the first, in terms of that would be the skill that I would say I had, because, I wouldn't be the best at SEO and I wouldn't be the best at Amazon which I went to later on, which I at the same sort of, but at the same time, I was there soon enough to, where the competition wasn't, there, to be honest with you. And that's so,
Get curious. So I think the takeaway here is get curious about brand new things, right? Like things that are
for me. That's
interesting. Set some time aside that you have time to explore new tools, new industries, new marketplaces. Like if an Amazon competitor popped up today, 99% of the world's going to dismiss it because Amazon's so ginormous. They couldn't possibly get big enough. And I think TikTok Shop is an interesting example of that, right? Like
I was going to say, talking of jumping on things, I was telling people, 2 years ago, TikTok Shop, you need to be on that. And that, that's equivalent to, I say, won't look the same in, obviously in 3, 4, 5 years. It's, it's going to be very different. They're giving away a lot of, introductory things. So exactly that. Look for what's new. And I've always been, it can be to your detriment if you're looking at too many shiny objects and you don't stick with one thing. That's why I've only ever really, to my mind, built businesses to a certain level, not to the multi-millions, but to the sort of, to the, I would say, coming up to the million mark. And then I would sort of get either bored or I'd saturate what I could do with it and go on to the next thing, really. So it's a curse as well as a thing. And one thing I've always thought was, what if I actually stuck to something for years? Because I've been in and out of so many businesses. And that's what I'm trying to do now, basically, is trying to stick to the thing and see what happens if you play the long game. But back then, I would suggest having your, if you're just starting out in e-commerce or anything, I would, don't go in and Google and find on Amazon like yoga mat and try and, think, I'm going to design it, just think out the box a little bit and maybe go a little bit sideways and left field with your thinking and try and find something where you're not that competitive I would suggest.
Interesting. So as an e-commerce seller, I mean, I think one of the interesting things that I found is that the undocumented pools of knowledge where I have found opportunities are generally through other people. My experience has been find people who tend to find tools, or like I've got a friend, I jump on a call with him every couple weeks, and he always introduces me to some new tool, which is actually kind of fascinating because I'm a tool junkie. I love trying out new tools and connecting, and got all these different gizmos and widgets that I've played around with and got them out there. So I'm early in the game in terms of identifying, but I found consistently over time that he was always introducing me to new stuff. Well, I started putting him on my schedule on the regular, right? So like every 2 weeks we're checking in again, and I'm asking him like, hey, what have you come across that you think's cool? And it would just come up naturally in conversation. So I think one of the things that you have to understand and do is see where the channels of information are running. And this is a very organic, natural thing, right? He probably has no idea that one of the reasons I like talking to him is because he introduces me to new tools, and those new tools bring value to me and my clients, and we connect a lot of those different dots. So I think pools of information in the form of trade shows or people or masterminds or Facebook groups, like go find the unofficial places. Because if you're waiting for it to hit msn.com, or you're waiting for it to hit your general social media news feed, like it's come up because it's now popular, you've passed the point of opportunity. And so I think it's identifying, like, how can I, like, for example, for me, Product Hunt is a great place to go watch, because when new products come out, Product Hunt is a place where people debut new products and ideas. AppSumo is another one. Like if you're talking about, obviously I'm a tool junkie, so those are two places where I go to find new tools. But I think that they're interesting as well, because many times when a new, like, TikTok Shop rolls out, people will try to build SaaS products on top of TikTok Shop. And so one of the first places you'll find out about TikTok Shop is on Product Hunt, where somebody tried to monetize some section of XYZ new thing. And so that's kind of how you can stay on that forefront. And I think AI just makes that even easier as you kind of connect those different, I mean, like you could sit down with AI and say, okay, the things I'm most passionate about and interested in are, how would you recommend me finding new wells of information or new pools of people, and start to have a conversation with it, and build Google alerts and build things that'll kind of warn you of new things that pop out in that realm.
Yeah, I mean, I would, as you it's such a good point about, either being in a community that knows. So I was on this thing, Acorn Domains. It's still around now, and I was there in like 1999. It's a UK site, acorndomains.co.uk, and that's where all the sort of, the people that I probably own like 80% of the UK domain names, like, like on there. And I don't know what it's like now. I haven't been back there for years, but I was on there, one of the first members, and I got to know the people that basically bought up everything. I mean, like everything, like gambling.co.uk, poker.co.uk. They own everything, and they're sort of probably about 40 people, I would say, that, and they were just like almost like the mafia of UK domains. And then in there were some very smart people. And there was one guy, a friend of mine called Scott, and he worked out when they released in the UK, I won't bore you too much with this, but they released the 2-letter domain names in the UK. They did that, I forget how many years ago, and 1-letter domain names like s.co.uk. He worked out you could actually trade, but they were giving them to trademark holders first. So he worked out you could trademark the letter S. So he actually trademarked the letter S. And he trademarked individual letters, and he then got a load of these domain names like s.co.uk, like things like that, which were like, worth thousands and thousands. And he basically was trademarking letters. Who knew you could do that? So these are the people that they're, like you said, there's having been around those sort of people, and being one of those sort of people, you suddenly do sort of start to see opportunities more. It's what, if you're going to ChatGPT now and you're putting in, tell me how to find opportunities, like, I don't know what that's going to look like, but if you want to sort of,
Well, I'm with you, and I think ChatGPT can help you consider the framework of thought, and maybe give you some ideas of
that's true,
of where other people have gone to find thought leaders. Because that's one thing I've discovered as well. If you want to find a process about, like, tell me how to find thought leaders, tell me how to connect those dots, it'll give you 4 or 5 different people who've written books on finding thought leaders. And so I found that you can kind of begin that search there, But then where you really find advantage is taking that, whatever it was that you were learning about and applying it in your own way outside of the search engines and connecting those different dots.
And the beauty now is with YouTube and podcasts and everything else, you can get, if you're looking in the right places and you're following the right things, you can learn so much incredible information that wasn't really there years ago. You had to sort of, so now I don't believe every bit of information is out there somewhere. If you follow the right people on YouTube, like Alex Hormozy, for example, marketing, incredible. It's stuff like that. It's just the best advice that you can get. It's all out there really. So there's no real excuse not to.
That's another thing that I found is I'll find people who give me good book reviews, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is the best business book to try to pay attention to earlier. Yeah. And that's how I found out about Alex Hormozy, was not through his YouTube or social media or anything like that. I found out about him through someone saying, hey, you really need to be reading $100 million leads. And I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. And so I went and read his book and was like, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about. And so you begin to follow those individuals. Absolutely. But same thing. I have 3 or 4 guys that I will often ask, hey, what books are you reading right now? And those are people that I meet with on the regular. And I'll say, hey, I'm running into this challenge. Have you come across a book that addresses that challenge? And kind of connecting those different dots in that way, trying to stay on the forefront of knowledge.
Yeah, well, I've got a good book recommendation website, which I bought about 7 years ago, so it's really good. But I'm not involved in it. Lovereading.co.uk and lovereadingforkids.co.uk. They're like and that's where we put like a lot of the new books. But it's just a little plug there. But so I do love I do love books as well. So I read a lot of stuff.
I love it. So, yeah. I love it. I think that's it's very, very valuable to begin kind of connecting those dots. And this actually segues super nicely to something we were talking about right before we began recording. Rob, we were talking about 2 things. We were talking about your name, which, by the way, Rob Prime, like being the guy named Rob Prime. We've had to reschedule 1 or 2 times for this podcast. Yeah. And when I've seen your name, I was like, I'll always remember that I haven't yet met with Rob Prime, and I'm excited to meet him and get to know him a little bit better because you just have the name so memorable, right? Like do you own robprime.com?
No, basically my business is called mrprime.com. So and it was my business partner Lauren who basically made us brand it as such, because I didn't want it to be called my name. I thought it sounded really egotistical, and it was like Mr. Prime, and he said, well, you've got to call it that because your name is, it's such a good brand name. So mrprime.com, and it is, and it obviously is my real name. I get asked, you would believe it, I get asked on calls, probably I reckon 1 in 2 or 1 in 3, is it my real name? And I also get asked, did I change my name in order to do the business? And I'm like, are you serious? Like I would change my name in order to to run an Amazon agency?
I'm not joking. I mean, you think about the people who run Amazon agencies and some of what's there. There are several who I would not put that past.
Really, wow.
Who I would not put that past to kind of look at some of what's there. There are so many cool people with cool names. Oz Merchant, I mention him often on calls. Yeah. His last name is Merchant, and Oz in Hebrew means brave. And I was like, dude, how do you beat Oz? I bow down to that. Like you've got some really solid stuff going for you there. So, and he runs right now. Absolutely. He's running ecommercehq.com, which is like all about referring other people to the best service providers and the best software, kind of trying to create a directory of all the different places, sellers can go to kind of get help with different stuff, which I think is really cool. Okay. Nice. The second thing we were talking about, and so Oz is one of those people who I would like try to connect with. The way I connected with Oz the first time was at a trade show. And I found trade shows are fantastic. They're a great place to meet people. I found that it works best when you have something to talk about. And so one of the ways that I discovered that worked was by using podcasts to create that. And so in this realm of like trying to identify thought leaders and trying to identify opportunities to create relationships with them, that one of the tools I use for that is a podcast. And so I want to share some of my strategy around what I've done with that, because you were asking about it earlier. And I think it applies to this idea of trying to find those individuals who are at the forefront, gathering information and, share with them, hey, this is my vision. This is where I'm hoping to go. And I found that people want to help people. So if I make a relationship with those individuals and I choose which ones I'm going to continue my relationship with, I can grow together with them, and we can figure out ways to work together. So podcasts. This was 2019, I believe, 2018, 2019. Yeah, no, I think it was 2018. I began my journey with a guy named Michael Greenberg, and he said, Will, why don't you get on podcasts? And I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, I have a strategy that helps me get on podcasts and helps me get on bigger and bigger podcasts. And then those podcasts lead to people listening, and there are leads that come through, and it's a good opportunity. And I was like, okay. And he brought me on as a client and helped me start getting placed on podcasts. So we made this ginormous list of people that were talking about automation, because automation was my business. I had started an automation agency back in 2017 before it was cool to make automation agencies. Now I feel like they're a dime a dozen. There's tons of digital operations companies out there. But I had begun my journey in looking into that, and I kind of sat on the forefront, and I had no idea how visible I was in this category. And same as you, I wonder where I'd be if I had just stayed the course, right? Very same as you. I began to get on larger and larger podcasts talking about automation and the ways that I could go there. And I ended up getting overwhelmed the middle of 2020. I didn't have enough time to continue my podcast journey of like getting on bigger and bigger podcasts. I plan to start that up again soon. But what I discovered is there are hosts right now who are hungry as all get out to bring on new guests. And once you get on one show, you can use the name of that show and a reference to that episode to get on another show. And so it's all about like, go to your closed, tight network and say, hey, does anybody have a podcast or have a buddy who's got a podcast? Because I'm looking to get on podcasts, and here's the value I can bring to a podcast. So you got to know, what can I talk about that might be a little bit different than other people that are out there? For me, that was automation. And I had automated hundreds of processes. So I knew the 5 questions you should ask before automating any process. So like if I said, I'm going to come on your podcast and tell you about the 5 questions you should ask before automating every podcast, I saw your eyebrows raised there. You were like, oh, really? The 5 questions you should ask before automating any process. So, and I talk about my framework, 15115, where I use this framework to decide what I should automate and what I shouldn't automate. You've already piqued your interest. Well, if you want to go dig into that more, dataautomation.com/podcast. And I've got like many episodes where I talk about that framework. So I'm not going to dive into that now, but you can see I found 2 ways that I could hook a host into saying, okay, he's got something that he could share with my audience that would be interesting. Okay, so that's the first step. What can I talk about in my experience? And this wasn't anything I Googled, right? I didn't Google any of the 5 questions you should ask before automating. There wasn't anybody out there talking about it because there wasn't that much to automate. We were in 2017. And so finding what are you doing on the forefront right now that not everybody's talking about, that you can share your experience and up-level somebody else's knowledge. That was the skill.
Nice.
So that's the first step. Find 1, 2, 3 different hooks, and imagine that you were going to write a white paper that you wanted someone to download in exchange for an email, right? So this is a lead gen strategy that a lot of places give out there. You've seen them, 10 things you should know before hiring a virtual assistant. You're looking for a title like that raises the eyebrows of the people who that host is servicing. And if you come to me with that title and say, hey, this is a topic I love to talk about, and it resonates, you're in. Not with the bigger guys. The bigger guys are going to look at it and say, well, tell me about how big is your audience? Right? Like, like they only want to, or tell me what what's your net worth? Or like, there's all sorts of interesting things that the bigger guys, and that's because they're getting solicited by more and more people to get on their podcast. And so they can ask those questions to filter and only have the bigger people on there. So that's kind of the strategy that I've discovered is identify something that resonates, start with the smaller guys, and then start referencing those episodes. If you come to the table with, here's 3 podcasts. So like there's different people in the industry right now. Just off the top of my head, E-commerce Fuel has a podcast. If I had gotten on that podcast, so I've been on a couple of different podcasts. Aaron Conant had me on his podcast, and the guys over at Getita are going to have me on their podcast. So those are 2 names that I would throw out, and I'd say, and I can talk about this, this, and this. Well, those are decent sized names in the industry. But if I could get on E-commerce Fuel, then it's my oyster, right? At that point, I can say, hey, I was just on E-commerce Fuel. I talk about this in e-commerce. This is what's different about, the way I approach things. Let me know if you've got 5 minutes to chat.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a good strategy. It's similar to what we did as an agency. Actually, the first time I started this agency, I got a Dragon's Den person as a client. So by offering free work basically for them, and a free 2 days, I sort of worked for you for 2 days for a testimonial, and so that's why my testimonial was from like Tuka Solomon on there. And then obviously you can just name drop that forever. So it's getting the first one, is a good sales strategy for sure.
Interesting. I love that. The other thing I would throw out, so this is another hack for getting on podcasts. I had a lady, and if you're listening to this, you won't be able to see it. But if you're on the video, you'll be able to see it. What I'm doing is I'm grabbing a sticky note and I'm writing Rob's name on it. And what I identified is there are several different platforms. Loom is a good example of one where they create a short GIF of the first 5 seconds of a video. That's how it rolls. So you can create the GIF manually. There are several different platforms you can look at this. But I found that people respond really, really well to video because it's harder to fake, right? Like it's harder to make it so that it's mass. AI is changing that a little bit. So we'll have to figure out what the next thing is that we do that, is harder to fake. But if I hold this up, and you can't really see it because of my cool thing. You
can see a bit, yeah.
I can see it. So you see how it says Rob? Well, what you'd want to do is you'd want to hold that up so close to the camera and get out a big Sharpie and make it darker, so that and that's funny because I actually have a Sharpie. I don't do this often, but when I do, I have to have a Sharpie. And let me show you what it looks like with a Sharpie. I like to grab that out and hold that up. And now you can see clearly it says Rob.
Yeah.
If you got something from me and I'm smiling in the background, and this is the video, I'm holding it up like this, you get an email that says that, or I send you a LinkedIn face video and it says Rob, and the thing is only 1.5 minutes long, you're watching that video. Guaranteed.
Absolutely.
Guaranteed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that trick, just, like sending that over, you'll get some of the biggest podcasts out there to watch your 1.5 minute video. And in that video, you pitch those 3 things that I mentioned before. Like, here's what I talk about. Here's why I'm awesome. Here's the different podcasts I've been on where you can listen to me a little bit more. I think it would be great to have a chat. Let me know if you want to do a pre-podcast interview. I got booked straight off of that video multiple times to be on podcasts.
I love that. And I'm always thinking of ways like that. It's like when I sent to my daughter, she's 16 and just going for a job interview. I said, do something to make yourself stand out, and so she wanted to work in a record shop. So she was going to put it on a vinyl sleeve, like her job, her CV. And I thought stuff like that, right? If you get that, now I'm employing people for the first time, and when I see people that follow me on LinkedIn as well and message me there as well as apply, it matters, and you just want to give them the job. Basically, you want to, you at least get your attention. Whereas there's so much noise out there now, you have to break through the noise. So I love that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you have to think about how to get around that. I was actually, I had fired myself from being the CEO of Data Automation. Data Automation now has a new CEO. It's still profitable. They're still doing their thing. They do boutique e-commerce integrations to connect different dots. When I was looking for my first gig, what I went and did was I had heard about somebody who had done a Venmo request for their entire year's salary with a comment on it that said, I will triple this in ROI. Let's get started. Nice. And I actually went and found a guy who was he was the founder of this SaaS startup, and I Venmo requested him for 90 grand and was like, and then I messaged him on LinkedIn and all these different places, but I got my interview, right? And then I landed the job. So there are definitely, you have to think outside the box to kind of look at that. And sometimes you don't have to think outside the box so far as just when you hear about an idea like that, write that down, put it somewhere in your mind so that you're going to remember that to kind of connect and build on everything that's going there.
Absolutely. We got, for like a recent job interview for an account manager, we got about 250 replies. And one of the people phoned up and said, is the job still going? Because I want to send you this stuff. He sent me samples of his existing brand of products that he's got. He sent me, like a folder, like a huge folder of a resume and all. I didn't look at half of it, to be honest with you. But it was amazing that he'd gone through that level of effort, and he was just so, and we'd already got someone by that time, but we said, we've got to get him as well, basically. So I said, I don't even know if we can afford it, but we have to get him. So this is the two sort of first account managers that we got. He was one of them. I thought, we can't afford not to get him because he's so good. And we didn't even have a really job at that. We didn't have a job at that point.
To hire. Okay, so listen, we can't afford not to hire this guy. Yeah. Because, and I think that's what you're looking for when you're trying to get on a podcast, when you're trying to solicit a guest to get on the podcast, can't afford not to do this. So Rob, out of curiosity, obviously we connected, got on the podcast and looked at this. One of the ways that we do that is by asking for referrals. And we ask, who do you think should be on the podcast, and kind of connecting those different dots. It's a way to continue that journey and do something to stand out.
Sure, absolutely. You asking who I think should be on it? I think one of the most interesting people I've met, and I don't speak to him much, but this guy I was mentioning, Scott Jones, who trademarked the letter S. He runs a reindeer. He bought reindeer.co.uk, I think, and he runs a reindeer farm in Scotland as well. And he's probably one of the most astute people I've ever met and most interesting. But I don't, but he's someone from my past that stands out. I've got a lot of interesting people that I know, but I don't even know if he'd go on podcasts. But he's the sort of person you'd want to.
That's exactly. Sort of person, he's super interesting, super unique.
Yeah,
and I found
he's
that
very, very sharp. Very sharp.
Everybody's got different sides of that. Okay. Yeah. So as we get to the end of the episode here, I have 3 more questions for you. One,
sure.
If you could make a phone call back to that 27-year-old, he's buying domain names like crazy. I know you'd tell him, one, hold on to those domain names. Like that would be one thing you'd tell him. Most of the time I hear invest in crypto. Like there's a couple of you'd tell him that. What piece of advice would you give him that would help him monetize his mental capital faster or better in the future? If I handed you a phone right now to get a hold of.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's I'd probably say find something that's working and stick with it, and hang on to it and keep growing it rather than selling it every so often. And and sometimes I had to sell it because I needed the cash, and then I started something else, and so on and so on. But I'd probably say find what works and just scale it. We'll learn how to now scale it. Now learn how to really scale it and build foundations to scale it rather than sort of looking for the next shiny thing. And learn to say no would be really important, because even now I get asked so many times, would you do this, JB? Can you do this product? Can you do this and that? And I'm trying to say no to everything, and that's really hard. And I'd say look for a very good reason to say yes. Basically, say no a lot, and have that focus, because when you're younger, you can take more chances and you can go for it with that thing. Then when you get older and you start, you get families and mortgages and things like that, it's a little more difficult to take those chances. So go hard and fast, young, and scale, and maybe just stick with that and grow it out really, and say no to the other stuff that comes up sometimes. But who knows, I might be broke and destitute if I'd done that. But that's probably what I would say to that person.
Well, and I think that's fascinating because, we're talking about many, many years of experience between then and now. And, you're saying, hey, look, I would say no to more things. And I would stick with, I believe that I would be in a better place today had I learned to hold on to some things and kind of sit through the uncomfortable part of this is getting a little boring. I'm with you. I too have had, sporadic jumping to different things. And I think that it's important to learn to say no. So,
yeah, there's an element of jumping needed as well. But once you do find that thing and you come across it, after you've maybe jumped a few times, then do stick with it, I believe, and ride it out, because proper brands and things aren't built in, a year, 2 years. As a rule, it takes maybe 10, 15 years. So yeah, that would be my advice.
I love it. Okay. Final 2 questions. One, I'm going to give you 60 seconds where you just stepped into an elevator and the guy next to you is like, yeah, I'm an 8-figure seller on Amazon. What do you do? And you're going to have 60 seconds to just tell him a little bit about Mr. Prime and what you do. Okay.
Sure.
And then right after that, we're going to ask you for any tips, tricks, hacks, or books that you've come across in the last year that have helped you monetize your mental capital.
Sure. Okay. So in the elevator, I basically say that I run an agency, Mr. Prime. We work with clients on commission-only basis because I come from a sort of gambling background, and I'm happy to sort of take a chance with, if I won't work with the seller unless I feel I'm going to do well. So why not put my money where my mouth is? So we try and be different in that respect. So we were happy to work on commission, which we do. We're commission only, and I've had a history of things that 7-figure, 8-figure sellers, depends how much profit you're making, is what I would say to that as well. Because I know plenty of 7-figure sellers that don't actually make any money. So but my elevator pitch would be, commission only, full service agency, and UK based, and we're pretty hungry.
I love it. You had 15 seconds more to go. Anything else you want to say?
No, just find me at mrprime.com, I guess.
Find me at mrprime.com. You heard it from Rob Prime, mrprime.com. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Any tips, tricks, hacks, or books that you've come across in the last year that have helped you monetize your mental capital?
Yeah, I mean, the Hormozy books you mentioned, so Sales, Leads, those 2 books are brilliant. And I love the simplistic way that he puts things, to be frank, because I think that's that's how my mind works. It's nice and simple. It's sort of, to get from A to B, I need to do this, and it's like, if I do this and it does well, then do more of that. It's simple stuff. And when you hear it, you think, oh, of course. But I don't think that has to be that complicated as as some things make it. So I'd say the Hormozy books. Obviously, Atomic Habits I read was really good. Really liked that as well, just to understand a bit more, about how my brain works and how to get habits. But I think those sort of books would be, my go-to ones I would suggest.
I love it. Rob, I really appreciate you joining us on this episode of Monetizing Your Mental Capital. That wraps us up. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you.